Somewhere in Pennsylvania, there is a crayon that weighs 1,500 pounds. It is taller than you are. It has a name, and you are not legally allowed to color with it. Not because a guard will stop you, because the second you tried, it would stop being a crayon at all. Hold on to that, because to understand it, you need a secret about the crayons sitting in your house right now. Here's a question that sounds childish until you actually try to answer it. How big is a crayon allowed to be? Not how big one can exist. How big are you legally allowed to make one and hand it to a child? You'd assume there's a rule, a number, a limit, a line buried in some government document. There isn't. Search every safety code in America. You will not find a single law that says a crayon cannot be a certain size. So in theory, you could build one as tall as a telephone pole. And that is exactly where this gets strange. Because no rule does not mean no limit. It means the limit is hiding somewhere you haven't thought to look. The law doesn't care how long your crayon is. It cares what's inside it. Every crayon sold to a child in the United States has to pass through something almost no one has heard of. A 1988 law with a clumsy name. The Labeling of Hazardous Art Materials Act. And it says something simple and a little unnerving. Before any crayon reaches a kid, a toxicologist has to examine it. A real one, a human expert. They study the formula for anything that could poison a child slowly, over years. Not because crayons are usually dangerous, because sometimes, quietly, they have been. And that's the part of this story nobody sees coming. In the year 2000, a newspaper ran a test. They sent ordinary children's crayons to a laboratory. Boxes straight off the shelf. Trusted names. The results came back wrong. Inside some of those crayons, scientists found asbestos. The same fiber that scars lungs. The same fiber tied to cancer. It wasn't put there on purpose. It came from talc, a soft mineral used to help crayons hold their shape. And some of that talc was contaminated at the source. 15 years later, in 2015, testers tried again with imported crayons. They found it again, tiny amounts, buried in the wax, in something a toddler might chew. Now hold that next to our giant crayon, because scale changes everything. A normal crayon holds a few grams of wax. Make it 15 feet long and you are holding hundreds of pounds of the same material. Whatever is inside, safe or not, you just multiplied it thousands of times over. The bigger the crayon, the bigger the promise it has to keep. And wax is hiding a secret of its own. But before we get to that, here's what's almost funny. Every safety rule ever written about crayons points the wrong direction. They were all terrified of crayons being too small. There's an actual test for it. A little plastic tube shaped like a toddler's throat. If a crayon slides inside it, it's a choking hazard. And it can't be sold to young children. Decades of law, careful science. All of it obsessed with a single nightmare. A crayon small enough to swallow. Nobody ever wrote the opposite rule. Nobody imagined the person standing there asking, "But how big can I go?" So a giant crayon doesn't break the law. It slips straight through a gap the law never knew it had. Now, that secret about wax. Pick up a crayon. Look at it honestly. It is a stick of colored paraffin. And paraffin is made from petroleum. It is the exact same wax they pour into candles, which means a crayon is really just a candle that refuses to admit what it is. A little one? Harmless. But scale it up. A 15-foot crayon is not a drawing tool anymore. It's a 1,500-pound block of fuel. Stand that in a warm room near a heat source and inspectors stop seeing a toy. They start seeing a fire that's only waiting for a reason. And just when you think nothing else can stop you, something does. The wax itself. A crayon feels solid between your fingers. It isn't. Not really. Wax has almost no strength to carry its own weight. Scale a crayon up and physics quietly turns against it. It begins to sag in the middle. It cracks along its length. Past a certain size, a crayon cannot even survive being a crayon. It collapses under the sheer weight of being big. So the universe drew a line the lawmakers forgot. Make it too large, and it destroys itself long before a child ever touches it. Which leaves us at the strangest limit of all, the one nobody writes down. There's an invisible line every crayon crosses if it gets big enough. On one side, it's a crayon, a thing a child holds and draws with and yes, sometimes tastes. Cross that line, and it becomes something else entirely. A sculpture, a display, a block of industrial wax. And the law treats those two things in completely opposite ways. A crayon has to be safe enough to end up in a mouth. A sculpture just has to sit there and be looked at. So the real question was never, how big can a crayon be? The real question is, how big can it get before it stops counting as one? Which is exactly what happened in Pennsylvania. Remember our 1,500-pound crayon? It's real. Crayola built it. They called it Big Blue. They made it from crayons. Over 100,000 of them, melted down, mailed in by children across the country. By size, it is the biggest crayon on Earth. But look closely at what they did with it. They didn't sell it. They didn't hand it to a kid. They stood it upright as a monument and stepped back. Because the instant it grew that big, it quietly stopped being a crayon and became a thing you look at but never use. So, what's the biggest crayon you're legally allowed to make? The honest answer is unsettling. There is no maximum. You can build one the size of a tree and no law in the country will stop you. But you can only call it a crayon for as long as it stays safe for the smallest, most careless hands alive. The law never measured crayons in inches. It measured them in trust. That's the real secret of Big Blue. It's the biggest crayon we're allowed to make. Precisely because no one is allowed to use it. And trust, it turns out, is a very small thing to hold in your hand.